I am out here early this morning, just after sunrise, near my young lettuce. The air is still cool, carrying the fresh scent of dew. Last night, I placed this shallow tin, barely half full of some leftover beer, right into the soil beside these tender greens. It's a simple thing, really, one you can do with what's usually on hand. Let's see what it has done. I bend down, carefully lifting the tin, trying not to spill. See here? A few quiet hours, and this handful of those slimy garden nuisances, the slugs and snails, are no longer a threat to my precious seedlings. This isn't just luck, you see. It's the old way of a beer trap, and it works because these crawling creatures are irresistibly drawn to the rich yeast and fermenting sugars in that liquid. Today, I'll share exactly how to make and set these simple beer traps step by a careful step. You won't need to buy expensive commercial pellets or sprays that blanket your entire garden, which can be costly and a worry. This method is truly frugal, using things you might already have, and it's remarkably targeted, focusing only on the pests where you need protection most, all while keeping harsh chemicals away from the food you grow for your table. But it's important to understand this isn't a magical cure-all, and it won't work perfectly in every garden situation, especially for very large infestations. I'll show you when this simple beer trap is your most effective tool, protecting vulnerable young plants like these lettuce leaves, and when you might need to consider other strategies. We'll also talk about the common mistakes folks make, like pouring too much beer or placing the trap in the wrong spot, and how you can easily check if it's truly making a noticeable difference for your plants. It's a bit of practical wisdom, you see, a method my own mother Sarah used in her Lancaster County garden to protect her prized dahlias and early peas, back when I was just a boy. I remember my mother Sarah in her garden in Lancaster County, kneeling among her prized dahlias. It must have been around 1950 or so. I would have been about 6 years old, small enough to tag along without getting in the way. She was mighty particular about those flowers, you see, and just as particular about the tender shoots of her early spring peas. I'd watch her, sometimes with a repurposed tin lid, sometimes a shallow earthenware dish, filled with a bit of stale cider, set carefully near the edge of the flower bed. "These crawling critters," she'd say without looking up from her task, "they find the good smell, Isaac, but they don't find their way out." It was always a quiet chore, done with purpose, before the sun was too high and before the air grew thick with the buzzing of flies. She always kept it low to the ground, tucked away a bit, so our curious chickens wouldn't find it and make a terrible mess. Now, many years later, that simple observation holds true. Modern research confirms what Sarah knew from years in the garden. University extension services like those from Oregon State and the University of California have looked into these methods and confirm that beer traps are indeed an effective way for home gardeners to control slugs and snails. Researchers have found that these pests are strongly attracted to the yeasty smell and the fermenting sugars that rise from the liquid. They crawl into the shallow liquid, are unable to get enough grip to climb back out, and so they drown. It's a mechanism that relies on the slug's natural foraging behavior, turning their appetite for something sweet into their downfall. While my mother used leftover cider, the same principle applies to beer, because both contain those very same attractive fermented elements. This isn't a modern invention. It's a verified old principle put to good, frugal use. So, How does this old way work, truly? It's all about attraction. Slugs and snails have a keen sense of smell, especially for things they want to eat. Beer, with its yeast and fermenting sugars, puts out a strong, tempting scent. Think of it like a sweet bakery smell to us. These pests follow that aroma, crawl into the dish, and once they're in the liquid, they can't get enough traction to climb back out. It's a simple drowning trap, driven by their natural desire for food. This is different from baits that contain a toxin, which they eat and then die elsewhere. The beer trap brings them directly to the point of control. This method shines brightest in a few situations. If you have tender young seedlings like lettuce, spinach, or newly sprouted beans that are getting nibbled, a beer trap placed nearby can protect them. It's excellent for small vegetable patches, raised beds, or specific ornamental plants that slugs seem to favor. It's also a perfect choice for folks who want to avoid spreading chemicals on their land, especially in gardens where children or pets play. However, a beer trap isn't the right answer for every problem. If your garden is a large field, or if you have a truly massive, widespread infestation where slugs are everywhere, a few traps won't make a dent. They are more for localized control, not for eradicating an entire population over a wide area. And if you have curious pets, especially dogs that might be tempted to lap up the beer, you'll need to think about careful placement or another method entirely. We'll talk more about how to keep pets safe when we set the traps in a bit. For materials, you'll need just two things: a shallow container and some beer. For containers, old tuna cans, small pie plates, or even the bottom half of a plastic milk jug work wonderfully. Just make sure the lip isn't too high for the slugs to crawl over easily. As for beer, any kind will generally do, but stale, cheaper beer, or even the dregs from an old bottle, often works just as well as fresh, expensive stuff. The key is the yeast and fermentation. The specific brand doesn't much matter. Setting up these traps properly is where the real work of protecting your plants begins, friend. It's not just about setting a dish down, it's about thoughtful placement and consistent care, much like tending any other part of the garden. First, gather your materials. You'll need several shallow containers, like those old tuna cans that get tucked away, or small metal pie plates, or even the cut-off bottoms of plastic bottles. Just make sure their edges aren't too sharp, if you'll be handling them often. And, of course, you'll need some beer. Leftover or inexpensive lager works perfectly well. You don't need to buy anything fancy. I keep a jar of stale beer specifically for this purpose in the summer kitchen during the warmer months. Now choose your spots with care. Look for areas where you've seen damage, irregular holes in leaves, those telltale slimy trails, or actual slugs themselves, often found hiding under leaves or in shady, moist spots. Tender young plants, especially leafy greens like lettuce, hostas, or basil, are usually prime targets. Place your traps near these vulnerable plants, but not so close that the plants themselves might be disturbed, or that the slugs bypass the trap entirely. About 6 to 12 inches away is usually a good distance to draw them off. For a typical raised bed of, say, 4 by 8 feet, you might want 2 or 3 traps strategically placed. Once you've picked your spot, dig a small hole in the soil, just deep enough so that the rim of your container is flush with the soil surface. This is a critical step, you see. If the rim is too high, slugs will have trouble climbing in easily. If it's too low, Soil might wash into the trap after a good rain, diluting the beer and making a mess. Take a moment to make sure it's level so the beer sits evenly. Then pour about an inch or two of beer into each trap. You don't need to fill it right to the brim, just enough so a slug will drown once it falls in. If you fill it too full, it might overflow with a heavy dew or rain, diluting the beer and making it much less effective, besides wasting your supply. Safety is important here, especially if you have pets that roam your garden, like a curious dog or a cat that likes to nose around. They might be tempted by the smell of beer, which could be harmful if they drink too much. To keep them safe, you can place a small, sturdy stone or an upside-down terracotta pot over the trap. Just make sure to leave a small gap on one side or around the edges for the slugs to enter freely. This makes it much harder for larger animals to get to the beer while still allowing the pests access. Always consider the safety of children and pets when you're placing these. Once set, leave the traps overnight. The best time to set them out is in the late afternoon or early evening, as slugs and snails are most active at night or in damp conditions. That's when they come out to forage for food. The very next morning, or at the very least every other morning, you must check your traps. You'll likely find drowned slugs and snails, proof of their nighttime activity. Simply empty the contents into your compost pile or a trash can. Some folks prefer to wear gloves for this, which is a good hygienic practice, especially before you go back to picking vegetables. Rinse the trap if needed and refill it with fresh beer. This regular maintenance is truly key to the success of this method. If you let the beer dry out or become too diluted with rainwater, it won't be nearly as effective. If you notice a particular trap isn't attracting many slugs after a few days, try moving it to a slightly different spot nearby. Slugs can be localized, and you might need to hunt a bit for their preferred hangout. While searching for those favored spots and setting these beer traps is a wonderful, simple tool, it's important to understand their limitations and what to realistically expect from them. As I mentioned earlier, this method is best for small to moderate slug and snail problems, particularly in targeted areas. If your garden is truly overrun with these pests, or if you're seeing widespread damage across many different types of plants, you'll likely need to combine beer traps with other control methods. Think of them as one helpful part of your overall garden defense, not a solitary solution for a major invasion. One common misconception is that you can set these traps and then simply forget about them for a week or more. That's just not true, my friend. Beer traps require consistent, regular maintenance. The beer will evaporate, especially on a hot, sunny day, and it will become diluted by a good rain. Most importantly, it will fill with slugs. A trap brimming with dead slugs is no longer an attractive lure for new ones, and it can start to smell quite unpleasant too. You must check and empty your traps every day or two, then rinse them if needed, and refill with fresh beer. If you neglect them, they become ineffective and unsightly. Remember to dispose of the trapped slugs and old beer hygienically, away from where you prepare food, and always wash your hands afterward. Consider your local climate when planning. In very hot, dry weather, the beer will evaporate quickly, and you might find slugs less active overall. In humid, wet conditions which slugs love, the beer might get diluted faster, but you'll also see much more slug activity, meaning your traps will fill quickly. Adjust your checking and refilling schedule accordingly to keep them working well. If you find that after a week or so of consistent trapping, you're still seeing significant new damage to your plants. It's a good sign that your slug population is too large for traps alone, or that your placement might still need adjustment. Don't simply add more and more beer traps without thinking. Instead, consider combining methods. Hand-picking slugs at night with a flashlight, especially after a rain when they are most active, can be surprisingly effective for larger populations. You can also create physical barriers around very vulnerable plants, such as copper tape around a raised bed or a fine ring of diatomaceous earth, though diatomaceous earth will need to be reapplied after every rain. For very severe infestations, or if you simply prefer a different approach, commercial slug baits are an option. When choosing one, look for those that contain iron phosphate. These are generally considered less toxic to pets and wildlife than older baits containing metaldehyde. But always read and follow the label instructions precisely. Never use any substance in your garden that isn't specifically labeled for slug control. If you're ever unsure about a severe pest problem, it's wise to consult with your local university extension service. They often have great, unbiased advice for your specific area. And always make sure your traps are placed where curious pets or small children cannot easily get to the beer. How will you know if these beer traps are truly making a difference in your garden? The proof is right there in the tin, just as I showed you this morning. Start by setting your traps for 3 consecutive nights, emptying and refilling them with fresh beer each morning. Keep a simple count of how many slugs you find in each. Then, for the next 3 nights, keep checking for new damage on your most vulnerable plants, looking closely at those young, tender leaves. You should see a noticeable reduction in new holes or slime trails. Remember, a few slugs might still wander through your garden, but the goal is to significantly reduce the feeding pressure on your plants. Sometimes a heavy rain can wash away trails or bring out a new batch of slugs from hiding, so a little patience and persistence are helpful, you see. For me, this isn't just about catching slugs. It's about careful observation, thoughtful planning, and using what we have on hand wisely. Like my mother, Sarah, tending her dahlias with purpose, we learn to work with creation, not against it. We pay attention to the little signs around us, understand the habits of even the smallest creatures, and find simple, resourceful ways to protect the bounty that the Lord provides. It's a quiet satisfaction knowing you've cared for your piece of earth with wisdom and thrift, and that you're helping your plants thrive. What simple, resourceful ways have you found to protect your garden from pests? Share your own experiences, what worked well for you, and what challenges you faced in the comments below. Perhaps we can all learn from each other's good work and gain new insight. Next time, we'll talk about how to keep your harvest fresh and wholesome through the long winter months, using methods that don't rely on constant electricity. Until then, stay frugal, stay free,